It is raised a spiritual body. Whatever is born of mortal birth must be consumed with the earth. To rise from generation free, then what have I to do with thee? The sexes sprung from shame and pride, blowed in the morning, in evening died. But mercy changed death into sleep. The sexes rose to work and weep. Thou mother of my mortal part, with cruelty didst mould my heart, and with false self-deceiving tears didst bind my nostrils, eyes and ears, didst close my tongue in senseless clay, and me to mortal life betray. The death of Jesus set me free, then what have I to do with thee? It is raised a spiritual body.
To Tirzah from the Songs of Experience. It is quite a difficult poem. This work was added to later copies of the Songs of Experience after mid-1805. So you've got to remember he first started making the Songs of Innocence in 1789, so this is some sort of 15 years later, and Blake had developed quite a few of his ideas by then, and developed his own personal mythology, which can make the poem pretty difficult to understand. Let's just kind of get the basics of it though. So the first verse is talking about how what is born of mortal birth, born a human being in other words, must be consumed with the earth, must die a natural death, must die, to rise from generation free. Now, generation is a name for experience. In Milton, in his poem, which chapter 41, line 28, he says, "A time will come when generation is swallowed up in regeneration," and in chapter 7, line 65, holy generation is declared to be an image of regeneration. So generation is experience, so that basically you die and that's the end of your experience of life. Then what have I to do with thee? That's rather mysterious, isn't it? This is variations on this rebuke are suffered both by Elijah in Kings in the Bible, chapter 18, line 18, and Jesus himself in Matthew, chapter 12, lines 46 to 50. But the crucial text is Jesus' rebuke to Mary just before conducting the miracle at Cana in his own way and time. John verse 2, line 4. So the question comes up a couple of times in this poem. What have I to do with thee? You know, what's my connection with you? And so the poem is posing this sort of central question: how are we connected as human beings? How are we connected to the natural world? How are we connected to life and death? The sexes sprung from shame and pride, blowed in the morn, in evening died. So we have the sexes are Adam and Eve. In Platonic myth, the change from a primordial androgynous state to one of sexual distinction is an aspect of the fall. So this is the idea that male and female were sort of invented categories. And as a result, we create a world of shame and pride. I suppose in a way this has become quite a modern idea. Many sort of post-structuralist thinkers think that most of our ideas about the genders are socially constructed. That is to say, we've sort of invented them as human beings. There are sort of biological differences, obviously, which they call to do with sex, but gender differences are largely because we as a society have dressed the different sexes in different roles. So, you know, when you're a boy, you get a huge amount of social attitudes and behaviours are expected of you, as opposed to being a girl. It's almost like you kind of enter a stage and you're given this sort of gender role to enact out in your life. And Blake's arguing in many of his poems that these sort of gender roles lead to people feeling ashamed, and also feeling pride in their genders. So that's important. In the evening died, in the end these gender roles will just melt away with death, but that's important. But mercy changed death into sleep. So God meant that death isn't so real. It is a form of sleep, and then there's a sort of regeneration of the human being after that. The sexes rose to work and weep. So Blake constantly got this idea that, you know, when you divide things up into male and female, you create misery. That we should be thinking of ourselves as one human race, not thinking of ourselves as kind of separate men and women, girls and boys. Thou mother of my mortal heart, with cruelty didst mould my heart. The Mother Earth he's addressing here, and we saw this in Earth's answer. The Earth is crying out because she's been treated so badly by the sort of father figure that's and here, though the things have been turned on its head and the mother is cruel, she's shaping someone's emotions, their heart. Cruelty did mould my heart. They're making you feel in a particular way. With false deceiving tears did bind my nostril, eyes and ears. That she gave sort of false stories about the sorts of things the senses should be doing. I think particularly this is often connected to shame and sexual shame, and this is an idea that runs through all of the experience poems, that, you know, if you make people feel ashamed of their sensual being, their sense of smell and touch and sight, then you create kind of mental imprisonment, which he talks about in London, the whole idea of the mind-forged manacles. So he's sort of kind of arguing this case that we've been shaped by these kind of forces, that the Mother Earth force, the Father force, and we've made these false divisions between the sexes. We've created a sense of shame when we feel and touch and see things, and he then ends with this: didst close my tongue in senseless clay, and me to mortal life betray. That the mother figure makes people senseless clay. Again, this idea that, you know, strips people of their imaginations, strips people of their innocence, essentially, and makes them mortal in the sense that they are going to, their individuality is going to die. They're selfish. There's a kind of deep sense of death embedded in this sort of notion of this selfish kind of being that's being created. The death of Jesus set me free. So in the Everlasting Gospel, this is a reference that Blake wrote. For Blake, Jesus sets us free not because he atoned for our sins, but because he inspires us through his exemplary act of self-sacrifice. The inscription about the raising of the spiritual body is from Corinthians chapter 15, line 44. The whole passage, beginning at chapter 15, line 35, was one of greatest interest to Blake, and he makes use of it many times. You see also Corinthians first book, chapter 12. So Blake believed that Jesus sacrificed himself to make us aware that we're not chained in the way we think we are to a mortal body. We're part of a kind of collective spirit of human beings. That means that we pass through the ages. Our individuality may die, our sort of selfish individual aspect may die, but if we've had a kind of genuine innocence about our being and a genuine sense of joy, we pass that on. That joy can be passed on if we've had that kind of attitude. So I think, you know, it's quite a complicated sort of idea that Blake's developing, that he's saying we do die, our bodies die and we disappear, and the sort of selfish part of us disappears, but there is a kind of immortal part to us if we've tapped into it, the imagination, the sense of joy. So, you know, for example, if you have a sense of joy in your life, feelings of happiness, that's probably been passed on to you by your ancestors who have had the same sort of sense of joy, that these sorts of feelings are eternal feelings that are passed on and they transcend your bodies. Then what have I got to have to do with thee? And then he ends that question, you know, what have I got to do with you? And I think he sort of answered the question that we are all interconnected, and it's when we divide things up, or when we're selfish, and we saw this in the human abstract, didn't we? We saw it in the poison tree, we see it in London. When we're selfish, we split us up into little individuals, and we stop being part of this kind of creative human project. Tirzah is a difficult poem, but it's quite rewarding because it makes many links to some of the other poems and his own mythology.